"Why are all the cards blocked?" I asked the cashier, my voice barely a whisper. The line behind me was growing a chorus of impatient sighs and shuffling feet. Just an hour earlier, I was Liam Carter, a successful financial analyst, a husband, a father. Now I was just a man whose life had been declined. It all started in the boardroom that morning, a place where I was usually the one in control. The quarterly earnings report was projected onto the wall, a sea of green arrows and positive numbers that I knew by heart. I was in my element, breaking down complex data into a language our investors could understand. My boss, Mr. Harrison, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, nodding along, his usual stern expression softened by the impressive profit margins. My colleagues, people I had worked with for nearly a decade, were focused, taking notes. It was a normal Tuesday. It was the last normal moment of my life. I was mid-sentence explaining our growth strategy for the next fiscal quarter when the door to the conference room opened. It wasn't a quiet interruption. It was deliberate, firm. A woman I had never seen before stood there dressed in a plain black pantsuit. She held a thick manila envelope in her hand. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing everyone until they landed on me. "Liam Carter," she asked. Her voice was flat, professional, and loud enough to command the attention of everyone in the room. The presentation stopped. The clicking of pens stopped. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled from the screen to me. I cleared my throat, confused. "Yes. Can I help you?" "We're in the middle of a meeting. This will only take a moment," she said, walking directly toward me. She didn't look at anyone else. Her focus was entirely on me, like a predator singling out its prey. She placed the thick envelope on the table directly in front of my keyboard. The thud it made seemed to echo in the silent room. "You've been served. Served." The word didn't compute. I looked at the envelope. My name was typed on a label along with my work address. It felt official. It felt ominous. The woman turned and walked out as efficiently as she had entered, closing the door softly behind her. The silence she left behind was deafening. Mr. Harrison broke it. "Liam, what was that all about? I have no idea," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the envelope. I could feel the weight of my colleagues' stares. They were no longer looking at a successful analyst. They were looking at a spectacle, a mystery. I tore open the flap, my heart starting to pound a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I pulled out a thick stack of papers. The document on top was stark official and utterly terrifying. In bold capital letters it read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce." The word hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Chloe was divorcing me. But why? We had an argument last week about vacation plans, but it was nothing major. We had been distant lately, yes, but divorce. Beneath the first page was another, even more shocking. Emergency protective order. My eyes flew across the legal jargon, picking out phrases that made no sense. Prohibited from contacting. Must remain at least 100 yards away from the petitioner, Chloe Carter. And the minor children, Mason Carter and Ava Carter. I couldn't breathe. I was being legally forbidden from seeing my own children. Mason, my 8-year-old son, who was waiting for me to help him with his science project tonight. Ava, my 6-year-old daughter, who made me promise I would be there to tuck her in and read her a story. What was happening? This had to be a mistake, a cruel, elaborate prank. I frantically flipped through the pages, searching for an explanation, a reason for this nightmare. And then I found it. A sworn declaration signed by Chloe. My Chloe. The woman I had loved since college. The mother of my children. Her signature was firm, confident, sitting at the bottom of a list of accusations so vile, so completely disconnected from reality that I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Embezzlement. The petition claimed I had been stealing from my own company, funneling funds into a secret offshore account. I looked up from the paper, my eyes darting around the room at the very people I was accused of stealing from. Their faces were a mixture of shock and suspicion. Gambling addiction. It alleged I had a severe online gambling problem, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last year, putting the family's financial security at risk. I hadn't so much as bought a lottery ticket in my life. The very idea was absurd. Emotional abuse and intimidation. This was the part that truly broke me. It painted me as a monster, a tyrant who controlled Chloe's every move, who threatened her, who made her fear for her safety. It mentioned a specific threat that if she ever tried to leave me, I would use my connections to make sure she never saw her children again. It was a lie. A vicious, soul-crushing lie. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. The papers rattled in my grip. I looked at Mr. Harrison, my mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. His expression had changed from curiosity to cold appraisal. He was looking at me not as his star analyst, but as a liability, a potential criminal. "Liam," he said, his voice low and serious, "I think you should go home." "This isn't true," I managed to choke out. "None of it is true. This is a mistake." No one said anything. Their silence was an indictment. They didn't know what to believe, but the official-looking documents in my hand were far more convincing than my frantic denials. "Security will escort you," Mr. Harrison added, his tone leaving no room for argument. He was already protecting the company, protecting it from me. I stumbled out of the conference room, the heavy envelope clutched in my hand like a death sentence. 2 security guards, men I usually shared a friendly nod with in the morning, were waiting for me. They didn't look friendly now. Their faces were impassive, their posture rigid. "Sir, we need you to gather your personal belongings from your desk," one of them said. I walked to my cubicle in a daze, the open-plan office suddenly feeling like a fishbowl. Everyone was pretending to work, but I could feel their eyes on me. I could hear the whispers starting. I saw my coffee mug with a picture of Mason and Ava smiling on it. Their faces were a gut punch. I felt a desperate, urgent need to hear Chloe's voice, to hear her tell me this was all a terrible misunderstanding. I pulled out my cell phone, my fingers fumbling as I navigated to her contact. I pressed call. It rang once, then went straight to a cold, automated voice. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Disconnected. No, she hadn't disconnected her number. She had blocked me. The finality of it was absolute. The security guards watched me, their patience wearing thin. I numbly packed my photos, my favorite pen, a small plant I had been nursing for months, into a cardboard box. It was a pathetic collection of the life I had built here for 10 years. Each item felt like a relic from a past that had ceased to exist just minutes ago. They walked me to the elevator, one in front, one behind. It felt like a perp walk. As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught a final glimpse of the office. My colleagues were already gathered in a small group, their heads together, no doubt dissecting my sudden, spectacular downfall. In the span of 15 minutes, I had lost everything. My job, my reputation, my wife, my children. I was falling, and I had no idea how far the bottom was. I didn't know then that the bottom was still a long way down and that the nightmare was only just beginning. The courtroom was colder than any winter I had ever known. It was a sterile, impersonal space of polished wood and muted colors designed to strip away emotion and leave only the hard facts. But my emotions were all I had left. They churned inside me, a toxic cocktail of fear, disbelief, and a rage so profound it felt like it might burn me up from the inside. I sat beside my court-appointed lawyer, a young man named Ben, whose suit was a size too big and whose eyes held a permanent look of being overwhelmed. He had been assigned my case just 2 days ago, given a mountain of lies to sift through with barely enough time to remember my name. He was doing his best, but we both knew we were a rowboat facing a battleship. Across the room was the battleship. Chloe sat beside her lawyer, a man named Lawrence, whose tailored suit probably cost more than my first car. He radiated a slick, predatory confidence. He would lean in and whisper in Chloe's ear, and she would nod, dabbing at her eyes with a pristine white handkerchief. She looked like the perfect victim. Her hair was done, her makeup was subtle and flawless, and she wore a simple, modest dress. She looked like a woman who was suffering, a mother who was terrified for her children. She didn't look like the woman I had spent half my life with. That woman was gone. In her place was a stranger, a performer playing the role of a lifetime. "The court calls Chloe Carter to the stand," the bailiff announced. Chloe rose gracefully and walked to the witness box. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore the oath, her voice soft and trembling. She wouldn't look at me. I tried to catch her eye, to send a silent message, to ask the one word that was screaming in my mind. Why? But she kept her gaze fixed on Lawrence, her anchor in this storm she had created. Lawrence began his questioning gently, his voice full of a synthetic sympathy that made my skin crawl. He started with the basics, establishing the length of our marriage, the names and ages of our children. He was painting a picture of a happy family, a perfect life, before he began to tear it all down. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice dripping with compassion. Can you please tell the court what led you to make this difficult decision? Chloe took a shaky breath. I was scared, she whispered, her voice cracking. For a long time. Liam, he changed. The pressure of his job, I think. He started staying out late, being secretive with his phone and his computer. Then the money started disappearing. Disappearing, Lawrence prompted. How so? Large withdrawals from our savings, accounts I couldn't explain. When I asked him about it, he would get so angry. His eyes would get this cold, hard look. He told me it was none of my business, that he was the one who earned the money, and he would do what he wanted with it. Lies, I hissed to Ben. We discussed every one of those withdrawals. We were renovating the kitchen. She picked out the countertops. Ben put a calming hand on my arm. Not now, Liam. We'll get our turn. But I was beginning to realize that our turn might never truly come. On the stand, Lawrence presented his first piece of so-called evidence. He held up a thick stack of bank statements professionally printed and bound. Your Honor, these are certified statements from the petitioner and respondent's joint accounts over the past 6 months. You will note numerous wire transfers totaling over $200,000 to various international online casinos and sports betting websites. He handed a copy to the judge, to Ben, and then projected one onto the large screen in the courtroom. There it was in black and white. My name, our account number, and a list of transactions to places I had never even heard of. It looked real. The logos were correct. The formatting was perfect. It was a masterful forgery, a work of art designed to destroy me. I don't understand, I stammered frantically, flipping through the pages. This is fake. This is all fake. The judge looked at me over the top of her glasses, her expression unreadable. Counselor, control your client. Next came the emails. Lawrence produced a series of printouts, supposedly messages between me and an old college friend. In them, I bragged about a big win on a football game, complained about Chloe's spending habits, and callously referred to my family as a burden. The writing was clever. It sounded almost like me, but twisted, colder, more selfish. It was like reading a version of myself from a parallel evil dimension. He thought he was being clever, hiding it all, Chloe said, tears streaming down her face now. I found them in his computer's trash folder. He thought he had deleted them, but the final exhibit was the masterpiece. Lawrence announced he had an audio recording. Your Honor, this next piece of evidence is disturbing, and I apologize to the court for its content. It is a recording of Mr. Carter made by my client last week when she finally confronted him about his gambling debts. A tense silence fell over the courtroom. A technician pressed a button, and then I heard my own voice, distorted and angry, echoing through the speakers. The quality was poor, full of static, but the words were clear. Don't you ever question me. You leave, and I swear to God you will never see the kids again. The audio cut off. The courtroom was utterly still. I stared in horror. I remembered parts of those phrases, but they were from different conversations, weeks apart, smashed together to create something monstrous. The part about questioning me was from a playful argument we had over a movie plot. The part about the kids. I had said it, but the context was entirely different. I had been telling her a story about a client of mine, a messy divorce, and had said, "Can you imagine? He told her, you leave and you'll never see the kids again." They had taken my voice and turned it into a weapon against me. I shot to my feet. That's not real. That's edited. She pieced that together. Mr. Carter, sit down now, or I will have you removed, the judge said, her voice sharp as glass. I sank back into my chair, defeated. My own words had been used to condemn me. Lawrence walked toward the judge's bench, his work nearly done. He let the weight of the recording hang in the air before he spoke. Your Honor, he began, his voice now a solemn, powerful instrument. This is not simply a case of a marriage ending. This is a case of protection. We have clear evidence of financial instability, of deceit, and of direct, chilling threats against a mother and her children. My client is not here seeking revenge. She is here seeking safety. The law is very clear in these matters. The primary consideration above all else must be the best interests of the children. He paused, letting the legal phrase work its magic. What is in the best interests of Mason and Ava Carter? To remain in a home with a father who has gambled away their future. A man who is embezzling from his employer and could face criminal charges at any moment. A man who threatens their mother, the center of their world. The answer is obvious. For their safety, for their stability, for their well-being, they need to be with their mother and they need to be protected from the chaos and danger their father represents. We ask that the court grant the protective order and award sole temporary custody to Mrs. Carter effective immediately. He had done it. He had taken their lies and woven them into an airtight legal argument. Ben stood up to cross-examine, but what could he do? He asked Chloe if she had ever actually seen me place a bet. She said no, but that the statements spoke for themselves. He asked if I had ever laid a hand on her. She tearfully said no, but that emotional abuse was just as damaging. He was a boy with a slingshot fighting a tank. The judge didn't need long to deliberate. She looked at the mountain of fabricated evidence. She looked at Chloe, the perfect weeping mother, and she looked at me, the wild-eyed, outburst-prone man who had just been exposed as a monster. Her voice was firm, devoid of emotion. Based on the evidence presented today, this court finds that a clear and present danger exists to the petitioner and the minor children. Therefore, the emergency protective order is granted in full. Sole temporary custody of Mason Carter and Ava Carter is awarded to the petitioner, Mrs. Chloe Carter. All joint marital assets will be frozen pending a full financial review. Mr. Carter, you are ordered to vacate the family residence by 5 p.m. this evening. The gavel came down. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. It was the sound of my life ending. It was over. Just like that. I had lost everything. My children, my home, my money, my name. I looked across the courtroom one last time at Chloe. She was being hugged by Lawrence, her face buried in his shoulder. She didn't look back. She couldn't even give me that. She had fired the gun and didn't have the courage to watch the bullet land. I was alone, a ghost in the ruins of a life that no longer belonged to me. The police cruiser followed me up the long driveway to my own house. The house I had helped design. The house where I had pushed my kids on the swing set in the backyard and hosted summer barbecues with friends. Now I was returning to it as a potential criminal and outcast with a 2-officer escort. They weren't there to protect me. They were there to protect my family from me. The absurdity of it was a bitter pill to swallow. I was given 15 minutes. 15 minutes to pack up a life that had taken 35 years to build. Chloe was waiting at the door. She held it open just enough for me to slip through her body language, defensive, closed off. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. The police officers stood on the porch, a silent, imposing presence. "Hello, Chloe?" I said, my voice hoarse. I searched her face for a flicker of something, anything. Regret, sadness, even anger would have been better than the void that greeted me. Her eyes were flat, her expression like stone. It was like looking at a stranger who just happened to be wearing my wife's face. "You have 15 minutes, Liam," she said. Her voice was monotone, rehearsed. "Just get what you need and go." "Chloe, please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Talk to me. Tell me why you're doing this. We can fix this. Whatever this is, we can fix it." "There is nothing to fix," she said, her words sharp and final. "You did this. Now get your things." She turned and walked into the kitchen, leaving me standing alone in the foyer of a home that was no longer mine. I walked through the downstairs rooms like a ghost. Everything was exactly as I had left it that morning. The coffee mug I had used was still on the counter. Mason's half-finished Lego creation was on the living room floor. Ava's sparkly pink backpack was hanging on its hook by the door. It was a perfect snapshot of a life that had been mine only 72 hours ago. Now it felt like a museum exhibit of a lost civilization. I walked upstairs, my feet heavy on the steps. I went into our bedroom. Chloe's scent still lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the intimacy we once shared. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started throwing things in my movements, clumsy, robotic. A few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, a framed photo from our last family vacation to the beach. In the picture, we were all smiling. I was holding Ava on my shoulders, and Mason was trying to bury Chloe's feet in the sand. We looked so happy. We were happy. Or had that been a lie too? I zipped up the bag and turned to leave. As I walked down the hallway, I glanced towards the kids' rooms. Their doors were closed. I could hear faint noises from inside Mason's room, the sound of a video game. My heart ached with a desperate need to see them, to hug them, to tell them that Daddy loved them and that everything was going to be okay, even though I knew it was a lie. I took a step toward Mason's door, my hand reaching for the knob. "Don't!" Chloe's voice came from the bottom of the stairs. I looked down. She was standing there, her face a mask of cold fury. "Don't you dare go near them. You've done enough damage." "They're my children, Chloe," I pleaded. "And I'm protecting them from you," she shot back. That was when I saw them. I looked up at the window at the top of the stairs, the one that overlooked the front yard. Two small faces were peeking out from behind the curtains. Mason and Ava. They weren't running to me, they weren't crying for me, they were just watching. Mason's expression was a mixture of confusion and a new, unsettling anger that I had never seen on his face before. He was looking at me the way you would look at a monster. And Ava, my little girl, her eyes were wide with fear. Pure, undiluted fear. She saw me, and she shrank back behind the curtain, disappearing from view. That was the moment my heart truly broke. It shattered into a million pieces. The forged documents, the lies in court, losing the house that was all just the prelude. This was the real blow. Chloe hadn't just taken my children away from me physically. She had poisoned them against me. She had turned their love into fear. She had taken their father and replaced him with a villain from one of her stories. There was no coming back from that. Tears streamed down my face as I walked down the stairs past the woman who was once my world. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. I walked out the front door, the duffel bag in my hand, feeling impossibly heavy. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I got in my car, the single box of my office belongings still sitting on the passenger seat. I placed the duffel bag on the back seat. That was it. My entire life reduced to a cardboard box and a canvas bag. In just 3 days, I had lost my career, my reputation, my wife, my home, and the love of my children. I had nothing. I was nobody. I started the car and pulled out of the driveway, the police cruiser pulling out behind me to ensure I left the neighborhood. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring through my tears. I had no friends I could turn to, no family left to call. They would all have heard the news by now, believed the lies. I was completely, utterly alone. The gaslight blinked on a stark reminder of my new reality. I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking as I swiped my credit card. Declined. Of course. The joint accounts were frozen. I tried my debit card. Declined. Every penny I had was locked away from me. I was not only homeless, I was broke. Sitting there in the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, a crushing wave of despair washed over me. There was only one place left on earth I could go, a place I hadn't seen in over 20 years, a small, forgotten house in a dying town in rural Pennsylvania, the house where my mother Eleanor had lived and died. It was a ghost of a place filled with ghosts of a life I had left behind long ago. It wasn't a choice. It was the only option left. It was a long drive. A journey back into a past I barely knew because the present and the future had just been burned to the ground. The highway became a hypnotic blur of white lines and red taillights. I was somewhere in Ohio, or maybe it was already Pennsylvania. I wasn't sure. The states were bleeding into one another just like the days. I was driving my 10-year-old sedan, a car that felt like a relic from another life. A life where I used to haul soccer equipment and bags of groceries, not a sad cardboard box and a single duffel bag containing the remnants of my existence. I was running on cheap gas station coffee and a dwindling pile of cash I'd managed to pull from an ATM before Chloe's lawyer froze everything. My mind was a broken record, endlessly replaying the last 72 hours. The cold indifference in Chloe's eyes, the fake tears on the witness stand, the look of pure fear on my daughter's face. That was the image that haunted me the most. A ghostly imprint burned onto the back of my eyelids every time I blinked. How could she do it? How could she turn our children against me? The woman I had built a life with, the woman I had trusted with my soul, had systematically dismantled me piece by piece, lie by lie. The anger was a hot, raw thing in my chest, but beneath it was a chasm of confusion that was even deeper. None of it made sense. The professional forgeries, the high-powered lawyer, Chloe's sudden transformation into a cold, calculating stranger. It didn't add up. I first noticed the headlights around midnight. They were just two bright dots in my rearview mirror, one among many. But as the hours wore on and the traffic thinned out, the dots remained. They kept a consistent distance about a quarter-mile back, never getting closer, never falling behind. At first I dismissed it as paranoia, a symptom of the stress that was eating me alive. But by the time I crossed the state line into Pennsylvania, I knew it wasn't my imagination. They had been behind me for nearly 3 hours. I decided to test my theory. I eased my foot off the gas, letting my speed drop from 70 to 60. The headlights behind me did the same. I sped back up to 75. The headlights mirrored my acceleration perfectly. A cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a coincidence. I was being followed. My mind raced through the possibilities. It had to be a private investigator, right? Hired by Lawrence to dig up more dirt on me to catch me doing something I shouldn't. It was a disgusting thought, an invasion of what little privacy I had left, but it was a logical one. It fit the narrative of a messy, high-stakes divorce. I tried to calm myself with that thought, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. The weather began to turn. A light drizzle quickly escalated into a full-blown storm. Rain hammered against my windshield, and the wind buffeted my small car, making it feel like a toy. My old windshield wipers struggled to keep up, smearing the water across the glass and turning the world outside into a distorted, blurry nightmare. Through the streaks of rain, I could still see them. The headlights. They were closer now. Then they made their move. The black shape of a large SUV pulled out from behind me, accelerating into the fast lane. This is it, I thought. They're just going to pass. A wave of relief washed over me. But they didn't pass. The SUV pulled up alongside me, matching my speed exactly. I glanced over, trying to see the driver, but the windows were tinted so dark they were like black mirrors reflecting the stormy sky. For a long, terrifying moment, we drove side by side, two vehicles hurtling through the dark and the rain. It wasn't an overtake. It was an act of intimidation. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a private investigator. This was something else. Something far more menacing. The SUV suddenly swerved towards me, its massive frame encroaching on my lane. I yelled and jerked the wheel to the right, my tires hydroplaning for a terrifying second on the slick asphalt. The car fishtailed, but I managed to regain control. The SUV corrected its course, falling back in line directly behind me, its high beams now on full blast, flooding my car with a blinding white light. Panic set in. Pure, unadulterated terror. They weren't just following me. They were playing with me. They were trying to run me off the road. I pressed my foot to the floor, the old engine screaming in protest as I pushed the car as fast as it would go. 80, 90, 100 miles per hour. The car shuddered and shook, barely holding together in the torrential rain. The SUV had no such trouble. It stayed glued to my bumper, its lights still burning through my mirrors, erasing everything else from my vision. I was flying blind, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my body drenched in a cold sweat. I had to get off this highway. It was a straight line, a death trap with no escape. Up ahead, I saw a green sign, its letters barely legible through the sheets of rain. An exit for a state route, one of those small two-lane highways that cut through the rural heart of the state. It was a chance, maybe my only one. I didn't signal. I didn't slow down. At the last possible second, I yanked the wheel hard to the right, wrenching the car towards the exit ramp. The tires screamed. The car skidded sideways across the wet pavement, the back end threatening to break loose completely. For a moment, I was sure I was going to spin out to hit the guardrail and flip, but somehow, miraculously, the tires caught and I shot down the ramp, leaving the interstate behind. I didn't dare look back. I sped down the dark country road, the rain still coming down in waves. There were no streetlights here, only dense dark woods on either side of the road. The blackness was absolute. After a minute that felt like an eternity, I saw a narrow dirt road branching off to the left, almost completely hidden by overgrown trees. It was a huge risk. I had no idea where it led. But I had to disappear. I made the turn, my car bouncing and sliding on the muddy track. I drove about 100 feet into the woods, pulled over into a thicket of pine trees, and killed the engine. I cut the lights. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of rain drumming on the roof and my own ragged breathing. I waited, my body rigid, my eyes glued to the spot where the dirt road met the paved one. A minute passed, then another. Then I saw them. The SUV's headlights swept past the opening, moving fast. They hadn't seen me turn. They had overshot my position. I watched as the twin beams of light continued down the state route and disappeared around a bend. I stayed there for a long time, hidden in the dark, the engine ticking as it cooled. The adrenaline began to fade, and a chilling clarity took its place. The raw fear was replaced by a cold, hard certainty. That wasn't about divorce. Private investigators follow you, they take pictures, they document your movements. They don't try to kill you on a highway in the middle of a storm. Someone had paid for that professionally forged evidence. Someone had hired that shark of a lawyer, and someone had sent that SUV after me. Chloe didn't have that kind of money or those kinds of connections. She was being used. We were both pawns in a much larger, much more dangerous game. This whole thing, the destruction of my life, it wasn't the end goal. It was just the first step. They needed me isolated, broke, discredited, and alone. They wanted to strip away my entire world so that when they finally came for me, there would be no one left to look for me and no one to believe my story. This was never about my marriage. It was about my life. And for the first time, I realized I was fighting for my survival. I finally pulled into the driveway just as the sun was beginning to cast a weak gray light over the horizon. The house looked smaller than I remembered, sadder. The paint was peeling in long strips from the wooden siding, and the garden my mother had once tended with such care was now a tangled mess of weeds. It had been 2 years since her funeral, 2 years since I had last set foot on this property. I had been too busy with my own perfect life to worry about this forgotten piece of my past. Now it was all I had left. The key was still under the loose stone by the back door, exactly where she had always kept it. The lock was stiff, and I had to put my shoulder into the door to get it to open. A wave of stale air washed over me, the scent of old books dust and something else, something uniquely hers, like dried lavender. I stepped inside and closed the door, shutting out the world that had cast me out. The silence inside was absolute. It was the sound of a life that had ended a story that was finished, or so I thought. Walking through the small house was like walking through a museum of my own childhood. There was the worn armchair where my mother Eleanor used to sit and read for hours. There was the small kitchen table where I did my homework while she made dinner. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, a shroud preserving the past. My mother had been a librarian, a woman who lived a quiet, simple, and meticulously organized life. She was gentle and kind, but there was always a certain reserve to her, a watchfulness that I had never really understood as a kid. She rarely spoke of my father, and she never spoke of her life before I was born. It was as if her world had begun the same day mine did. I dropped my duffel bag in my old bedroom and walked back into the living room, not knowing what to do next. I felt a desperate need to clean, to organize, to impose some kind of order on the chaos that my life had become. I started with the windows, pulling back the yellowed lace curtains to let in some light. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. The window locks were not the simple latches that came with the house. They were heavy-duty deadbolts, the kind you would install in a high-crime area, not in a sleepy Pennsylvania town where most people didn't even lock their front doors. I checked the other windows. They were all the same. Why would my quiet, unassuming mother fortify her little house like a bunker? Then, by the front door, half hidden behind a coat rack, I saw the old alarm panel. It was a relic from the 90s, a yellowed plastic box with a simple number pad. I recognized the brand. It had been a top-of-the-line system back in its day, incredibly expensive. I remembered when she had it installed. I was about 14. I had asked her why we needed it. No one else on our street had an alarm. She had just said, "It helps me sleep better, honey." A librarian's salary was modest. Spending a small fortune on a security system for a house filled with secondhand furniture and books seemed completely illogical. It was another piece of the puzzle of my mother that I had never bothered to solve. My mind was reeling, trying to connect these strange details to the terror of the highway chase. The constant vigilance I had mistaken for a quiet nature, the extreme security measures that seemed so out of place. It was as if she had spent her entire life waiting for a threat, for a dark shape to appear in her rearview mirror. It was as if she knew something like this could happen. I needed a drink. I went into the kitchen and opened a few cupboards, finding nothing but dust and a few expired cans of soup. I made my way to the basement, hoping to find a forgotten bottle of something, anything. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the damp, musty darkness. The basement was just as I remembered it, a cluttered space filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, boxes of my old school projects, and holiday decorations. At the far end of the room sat a huge, ancient washing machine and dryer, hulking metal beasts from another era. I remembered them well, and I remembered what was behind them, just empty space. I had once as a teenager tried to move the washing machine to make more room for a weight bench I wanted to set up. I had managed to budget a few inches when my mother came down. I had never seen her so angry. Her face was pale, her voice sharp with a panic that was completely out of character for her. "Liam, what are you doing?" she had demanded. "Just making some space," I'd said. "No," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't ever move anything down here. The foundation is weak on this side of the house. It's not safe." Her reaction had seemed so extreme at the time. I had just assumed she was having a bad day. I'd pushed the heavy machine back into place and never thought about it again. Until now. Standing in the cold, damp air of the basement, her words echoed in my mind. "The foundation is weak." Was it a genuine warning, or was it a lie? A lie told with panicked eyes by a woman who had installed deadbolts on her windows and spent a fortune on a security system she couldn't afford. It was a lie to protect a secret. And I suddenly knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that whatever secret she had been hiding, whatever she had been so afraid of, was hidden right here in this basement on the other side of that old, heavy machine. My mother's panicked voice from all those years ago was a living thing in the cold basement air. "Don't ever move anything down here, Liam. The foundation is weak." It wasn't a warning. I knew that now. It was a command, a desperate plea from a woman guarding a secret so profound she was willing to lie to her own son to protect it. I stood before the ancient washing machine, a hulking metal sentinel that had stood in this exact spot for more than 20 years. I had to know what it was guarding. I ran my hand along the concrete floor at its base. It was rough, uneven, just like the rest of the basement floor, but as my fingers traced the perimeter of the machine, I felt it. A subtle, almost imperceptible line. I tapped the floor in the center of the room. It made a dull, solid thud. Then I tapped the floor next to the washing machine. The sound was slightly different, higher pitched, more hollow. I knelt down, aiming my phone's flashlight at the base. The concrete here was a fraction of a shade lighter than the surrounding area, the texture smoother. It was newer. Someone at some point had cut a hole in this floor and then sealed it back up. My heart began to pound a heavy, determined rhythm. Now I just had to move it. The machine was a solid steel behemoth from an era when things were built to last forever. I put my shoulder into it and pushed with all my might. It didn't move, not a millimeter. It was like trying to push a car with the parking brake on. I grunted, my muscles straining, my shoes slipping on the dusty concrete. The machine was mocking me, an immovable object protecting an unsolvable mystery. Frustration gave way to a surge of adrenaline-fueled desperation. I was not going to be beaten by a piece of laundry equipment. I rummaged through a dusty old toolbox in the corner, its contents a jumble of rusty tools I hadn't seen since my high school shop class. I found what I was looking for, a long, heavy crowbar. I also grabbed a few thick blocks of wood to use for leverage. The work was brutal. I wedged the tip of the crowbar under the front lip of the machine and threw my entire body weight onto the other end. The metal groaned in protest. I heard a loud screech as the machine's metal feet scraped against the concrete and it moved. An inch. Sweat was already beading on my forehead, stinging my eyes. My body, weakened by days of stress and barely any food, was screaming at me to stop. But I couldn't. I was driven by a force stronger than physical exhaustion. I was driven by the image of my daughter's fearful eyes, by the echo of a judge's gavel, by the terrifying sight of that black SUV in my mirror. The answers to everything were right here under this machine. I worked in a frantic rhythm. Pry, lift, and slide. Shove a wooden block under the raised corner. Reposition the crowbar. Pry, lift, and slide again. Each inch was a victory. The noise was deafening in the silent house. The screech of metal on stone was a sound that set my teeth on edge. With every scrape, I imagined headlights sweeping across the front of the house, the sound of a door being kicked in. The paranoia from the chase was still fresh, a raw nerve that twitched with every loud noise. After what felt like an hour, my hands raw and my back screaming in protest, I had moved it. It was about 3 feet from the wall, far enough for me to see what it had been hiding. I dropped the crowbar with a clatter and aimed my phone's light at the floor. My breath caught in my throat. There, perfectly outlined in the lighter-colored concrete, was a square, a trapdoor. It was about 3 feet by 3 feet, its edges so perfectly flush with the rest of the floor that you would never see it unless you knew exactly where to look. In the center was a small, recessed metal ring almost completely filled with dust. My hands were trembling as I knelt down and dug the dirt out of the ring with my fingernails. I hooked my fingers through it and pulled. It was incredibly heavy, a solid slab of concrete reinforced with steel. I had to plant my feet and lean back with my entire body weight. With a deep groan of protest, the hatch lifted, scraping against its concrete housing. I pulled it all the way open and leaned it against the wall. I peered into the darkness below. It wasn't a room or a crawl space. It was a small, perfectly square cavity about 4 feet deep, its sides lined with smooth, poured concrete. And sitting in the center of that cavity, bolted directly into the foundation of the house itself, was a safe. It wasn't a small personal safe. It was a serious piece of equipment, a dull gray cube of thick steel that looked like it could survive a direct hit from a bomb. It didn't have a classic spinning dial. It had a sleek black digital keypad and a small LED screen above it. My mother, the quiet librarian, had a high-security safe hidden under her basement floor. The woman who clipped coupons and bought her clothes from discount stores had a secret that required this level of protection. The illogical details of her life, the deadbolts, the alarm system, suddenly snapped into a terrifyingly clear focus. I climbed down into the cavity, the air cold and still. I ran my fingers over the smooth metal of the safe door. I needed a code. A 6-digit code according to the small display. My mind raced. What would she have chosen, a number so important, so secret that she would trust it to protect her entire world? The obvious choice was her birthday. I carefully punched in the 6 digits. August 14th, 1958. I pressed the enter key. A harsh red light flashed and a low error beep echoed in the small space. Wrong. Okay. What else? My birthday. November 3rd, 1988. I entered the numbers, my hope dwindling. I hit enter. The same red light. The same mocking beep. I tried everything I could think of. The address of the house. Her social security number. The year I graduated high school. Nothing. Each time the red light and the beep felt like a door slamming in my face. I slumped back against the cold concrete wall, a wave of defeat washing over me. It was hopeless. She had taken her secret to the grave. I sat there in the dark, the single beam of my phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. I thought about her life, the quiet, lonely life she had lived in this house. What were the defining moments? There was my birth. There was her death. And there was the one other major event. The one she refused to talk about. The day her life and mine was shattered. The day my father died. I barely remembered him, just vague impressions of a tall man with a kind smile who smelled like sawdust. He had died in a car accident when I was 12. That's what she had always told me. A tragic random accident. I remembered the date because it was a week before my birthday. October 27th, 1999. My fingers felt numb as I reached for the keypad again. It seemed morbid, a long shot, but it was the only significant date I had left. I punched in the numbers, 102799. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the enter key. This felt different. This felt like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for decades. I took a deep breath and pressed the button. There was no red light. There was no beep. For a split second, nothing happened. Then a small green light on the keypad blinked on. It was followed by a soft, electronic whirring sound from within the safe door. And then a loud, solid clunk. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The sound of bolts retracting. The sound of secrets giving way. The sound of the truth. My hand was shaking as I reached for the small handle. I pulled. The thick steel door swung open silently, revealing nothing but a profound, waiting darkness inside. My whole life I thought I knew who I was. I was about to find out that I didn't even know my own name. The air that escaped the safe was cold and dry like the air of a tomb. For a moment I just stared into the blackness, my mind unable to process the reality of it. Then, using my phone's flashlight, I aimed the beam inside. The first thing I saw was the money. It was stacked in neat, tight bricks wrapped in bank bands. 10s and 20s and 50s. It was an impossible amount of cash, more than I had ever seen in my life. It had to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. A librarian's salary. It was the first of many lies. Next to the cash were several large envelopes. I pulled the first one out. It was heavy, filled with documents. I opened the flap and tipped the contents onto the floor beside me. Passports, driver's licenses, birth certificates. I picked up a passport, The picture was of my mother Eleanor, but she looked younger, her face less worn by worry. The name on the passport was not Eleanor Carter, it was Catherine Hayes. I picked up another driver's license. Again, it was my mother's face, but this time the name was Sarah Jensen. There were 4 different identities in total, each one complete, each one meticulously crafted. My mother wasn't just a librarian. She was a ghost, a woman who knew how to disappear. Then I saw the other envelopes. One was labeled with my name, Liam. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely grasp it. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a collection of documents identical to my mother's. A passport, a driver's license, a birth certificate, all with my picture on them, all bearing a name I had never seen before. Benjamin Cole. I felt a wave of dizziness, the cold concrete floor seeming to tilt beneath me. Who was Liam Carter? Who was I? Finally, there was one last envelope at the very bottom of the safe. It was a simple cream-colored business envelope, and on the front, in my mother's familiar elegant cursive, was a single word. Daniel. Not Liam. Daniel. My blood ran cold. I opened the unsealed flap and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It was a letter. As I unfolded it, the scent of lavender, her scent rose from the page. I began to read the words that would erase my life and give me a new one. My dearest Daniel, it began. If you are reading this, it means that the life I tried so desperately to build for you has come apart. It means they have found us. And it means I am gone. I am so sorry. I am sorry for the lies, for the secrets, but I need you to understand that every single thing I have done, every choice I have made for the past 23 years was to keep you safe, to give you a chance at a normal life. A life you deserved. Your name is not Liam Carter. It is Daniel Rourke. Your father was not a construction worker who died in a car accident. His name was Michael Rourke, and he was a United States Assistant Attorney. He was a hero, Daniel. He was brave, and he was honest, and he was fighting to put very bad men behind bars. He was prosecuting the heads of the Torino crime family in Chicago, and they killed him for it. The car accident was no accident. They ran his car off a bridge. I was a witness. I was the key to their conviction. After the trial, the government put us into the witness protection program. We became Eleanor and Liam Carter. We were moved to this small town, given new identities, and told to forget everything about our past. I tried. For you, I tried so hard. I became a librarian. I raised you as a normal boy in a normal town. I watched you grow into a good man, a man your father would have been so proud of. But I always knew they would never stop looking. The Torino family's reach is long, and their memory is even longer. I built this house into a fortress. I saved every penny I could just in case. Just in case the day came when the ghosts of our past finally caught up to us. And now it seems that day has come. I don't know how they found you, but I know it is them. The kind of power needed to create such perfect forgeries to manipulate the legal system so completely, it has their signature all over it. They are not trying to ruin your life, my love. They are trying to isolate you, to strip you of your money, your credibility, your family, your support system. They are making you a ghost, just like they made me, so that when they finally decide to make you disappear for good, no one will be looking for you. And that brings me to the hardest part. Chloe, your wife. She is not the monster in this story, Daniel. She is a victim just like us. They found her. They must have threatened her parents, threatened your children. They forced her to do this. They used her love for her family as a weapon against you. You must believe this. The woman you love is still in there. She is trapped, and she is terrified. Do not hate her for what she has been forced to do. I have spent my life running from these people. But you cannot run. You have a family to protect. Your fight is not in a courtroom against your wife. It is against the men who are pulling her strings. You cannot do it alone. The government that promised to protect us failed once. We cannot trust them blindly. But I made a contingency plan, a lifeline. His name is Mark Riley. He is a federal agent, a U.S. Marshal. His father was your father's partner and best friend. He knows the whole story. He was just a boy when your father was killed, and he has spent his career waiting for this day, hoping it would never come. He is the only person on this earth you can trust. His number is on the back of this letter. Call him. Tell him who you are. Tell him Catherine Hayes sent you. He will know what it means. Be brave, my son. Be the man your father was. Survive this. Protect your children. Live the life we were robbed of. Know that I have loved you more than words can say every second of every day, and I will be watching over you, always. All my love. Mom. Catherine. I finished the letter, but I kept staring at the page, my eyes tracing the familiar loops of her handwriting. The words were a blur through the tears that now streamed down my face. My entire life. A lie. My name, my father, my mother's quiet existence. It was all a carefully constructed stage play, and the curtain had just been violently torn down. I wasn't Liam Carter, the failed husband and discredited analyst. I was Daniel Rourke, the son of a murdered hero, the boy who had been hidden away for his own safety. And the monsters from my father's past had finally stepped out of the shadows. A storm of emotions raged inside me. Grief for the father I never knew and the mother I had never known. Rage at the faceless men who had orchestrated my ruin, and a strange, terrifying sense of purpose. My mother hadn't just left me a story. She had left me a mission. I turned the letter over. There, written in the same steady hand, was a name and a 10-digit phone number. Mark Riley. It wasn't just a lifeline, it was a sword. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a son with a legacy to honor. And my war was just beginning. My hand was shaking as I held my phone, the number on the back of the letter seeming to glow in the dim basement light. This was it. This was the lifeline my mother had left me. I took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed. It rang 3 times, each ring an eternity. A gruff, tired-sounding voice answered, "Riley, my name is Liam Carter." I started, my own voice sounding weak and unfamiliar. "I was told to call you. Catherine Hayes sent me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The silence was so complete I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The weariness was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "Where are you?" "I'm at her house. In Pennsylvania." "Don't move," he commanded. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't use your credit cards. I'm 6 hours away. I'll meet you at the Oak Hill Diner just off the interstate at 8 a.m. Come alone." The line went dead. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in my mother's armchair. The letter in my hand, my world completely unraveled. When the time came, I drove to the diner, a classic greasy spoon that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. I slid into a booth in the back corner and ordered a coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. At precisely 8 o'clock, a man walked in. He was in his late 50s, with tired but sharp eyes, a cheap suit that didn't quite hide his powerful build, and the unmistakable air of a man who had seen too much. He scanned the room, his eyes landed on me, and he walked over and sat down without a word. "You're Riley?" I asked. "Show me the letter," he said, his voice low. I slid it across the table. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he folded it carefully and looked at me. Really, looked at me for the first time. "Your father was a good man, Daniel. The best I ever knew. My dad was his partner. I was 16 when they killed him." In that moment, the last of my doubt vanished. This was real. He asked me to recount everything that had happened from the moment I was served divorce papers to the chase on the highway. I told him everything, my voice gaining strength as I spoke. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "The Torinos," he said when I was finished, the name sounding like a curse. "Old man Rocco Torino is still running the show. He never forgave your mother for putting his brother away for life. He's been hunting you since the day you disappeared." What followed was a whirlwind of activity that felt like something out of a movie. Riley made a single phone call, and suddenly I was no longer a lone man in a diner. I was under the protection of the United States Marshals Service. Within hours, the full force of the FBI was brought in. They debriefed me for an entire day in a cold official building that smelled of stale coffee. I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much, but combined with my mother's letter, it was enough. Their first priority was Chloe and the kids. A team of federal agents descended on my old house. They secured my children and took Chloe and her parents into protective custody. As my mother had suspected, Chloe wasn't a villain, she was a hostage. The Torinos had found her through a distant relative. They had shown her pictures of her parents, of Mason and Ava, and had given her a choice: Ruin your husband's life according to our script, or we will ruin your entire family. She had done what any terrified mother would do. Once she knew her family was safe, the whole story came pouring out. She became the FBI's star witness. She identified the men who had threatened her and provided the details of their plan. They had wanted to push me to the edge of a breakdown to isolate me completely before they staged an accident of their own. My mother's foresight and Agent Riley's intervention had saved my life. Armed with Chloe's testimony, the FBI moved fast. They used her to set a trap, and one by one the pieces of Rocco Torino's network began to fall. And finally they came for the old man himself. They arrested him at his sprawling Chicago estate, the same place where 23 years earlier he had ordered the murder of my father. With the arrests, the carefully constructed case against me evaporated. The fraudulent charges were dropped. My name was cleared. My assets were unfrozen. The nightmare was finally over. The hardest part was the last. Agent Riley arranged for me to meet my children at a neutral location, a quiet park with a playground. When I saw them, my heart felt like it was going to burst. Chloe was there, standing a short distance away. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a universe of pain and regret. We would never be husband and wife again, too much had been broken, but we were still parents. We would find a new way forward. I knelt down as Mason and Ava approached me, their steps hesitant. Their faces were full of confusion, the fear now mixed with a fragile hope. "Hey," I said softly. "Mom said..." "She said you're not a bad guy," Mason said, his voice small. "She said you're a hero." I pulled them into my arms, holding them as tightly as I could, tears of relief and sorrow streaming down my face. I held my children, the two most important people in my world, and I knew that this was what my parents had fought and died for. This was their true legacy. I started a new life that day. I was no longer Liam Carter, the man whose life was a lie. I was Daniel Rourke, the son of Catherine and Michael Rourke. I had my children back, and I had a long story to tell them. A story about a brave man they never got to meet, and a grandmother who was more courageous than any superhero they could ever imagine. My mother had left me more than money in that safe. She had left me the truth. And with it, she had given me my life back. Sometimes the foundations of our lives must be shattered to reveal the truth they were built upon. True strength isn't found in the life you've perfectly constructed, but in your ability to rebuild from the wreckage when you discover who you were truly meant to be.